Alright, Chapter 2, in which Quba tries frantically to remember how he did the rain simulation. Let's get on it. We can close the depth map, we can close the city shimmer for now, and create a new composition in which we're going to do some raindrops. Ctrl Y for the new solid, and we're going to call the first one Raindrops Static. So my rain simulation will be a combination of two particular systems. One will be completely static and one will be moving, and that's pretty much how rain looks on the window. You would have those drops that accumulated over time and they're just there, static and not moving, and then you have a number of streaks that just go down over time. If you roll back this video and look at the examples I shown in the beginning, when doing the snack animation, I made all the streaks constantly travel down, and it looked a bit weird. It looked like, I don't know, some sort of worms tunneling through the glass. When I was doing the second one, I decided to have just a few streaks and be much more conservative with it, and it gave the video much more realism and polish. Alright, so there we go. Let's begin by applying Trapcode Particular. And I always forget that Trapcode is not a part of the name of the effect. So Trapcode Particular. And this is not going to be super exciting, but you just gotta bear with me. Let's move it and pre-compose it and moving into own composition. So Raindrops Static will be the name, move all attributes and open it up. This way we don't have to deal with anything else. Okay, this is the classic preset. Let's change our emitter into box and make the box, whoops, it can still be centered. Where's the size? Let's make the box wider and taller, and actually we can make it even deeper. And the depth will help us just achieve different sizes of particles. We don't want to spend too much time emitting them, so I'm going to try emit, let's say 5,000 particles per second. Turn it into a square keyframe, so right click, hold keyframe, go one frame ahead and lower it to 0. And let's see, is this the amount of drops we're happy with? I think so. This looks fairly fine. So what I can do is just offset this by pressing Alt page up so that the generation happens before the composition starts. And this way we begin with all the particles already there and no new particles get born over time. Now our composition is fairly long, so we may want to increase the life of our particles. So let's go to particle life and just type 12 seconds. Since the composition is 10 seconds long, that's gonna be long enough. And let's eliminate that movement. We don't want them to fly all around. So velocity 0, random 0, distribution 0, from motion 0. Cool. They're sitting like good little particles they are. Let's play with some more settings. So I'm not yet super happy with the way they are distributed. I would like to have fewer empty areas, so I'm just gonna play with that random seed and see if I can find something nicer. This is a bit too organized. Wow, this doesn't look random at all. And this always takes a bit of experimenting. Wow, you can totally see different shapes in it. You know what? This is kind of cool. This is better. You know what? This is not cool at all. 1, 2, 3. We have too many recognizable patterns. Okay. This is taking too long. You guys are getting bored in front of your computers. I'm getting bored even looking at it. I'll settle for this one. Take a note. Random seed. 10,370. You know, that's of course absolutely insignificant. We do it just how we like it. Let's see, particle size, let's bump it up a bit. So 7 seems to work fine for me. And I'm gonna zoom in go to full size just so I can see it better, and probably want to punch it up. We don't want those tiny dots at all, so let's go up to maybe 10. Yeah, and probably I need to recompress it. I gave it a bit too much space in Z, so let's go back to, let's say, 600. Okay, so they're much more similar to one another right now, but we can quickly change it by just applying some size variation. So bump it up to around, what, 25, and this should do it. One of the particles right now, you can see, is right here, and that's gonna create some problems later on, and I'm not gonna fix it in this composition, but we should remember it for later. I'm also going to extend the emitter just a bit more so everything is spread more evenly throughout the scene. So okay, Raindrops static, we're done with this one, I think. Zing, I cheated you, there's gonna be no rain, this is snow effect, and we're done. Okay, no, I did not, and let's continue. So I can create another copy of this Raindrops static to serve as a baseline for our dynamic raindrops, but you know what, probably it will make more sense to just do it from scratch. So I'm gonna turn off the Raindrops static, actually remove them all the way from here, create a new solid, Raindrops dynamic, and this looks fine. Immediately pre-compose it with itself and apply particular. And did we? No, we did apply particular, but somewhere else. I wonder where. What was selected at that time? Nothing? Maybe I just misclicked. Alright, let's do it again. It's either that or weird particles will start popping up in unexpected places a few minutes from now. When I was doing my video that I shown you in the beginning, I wanted it to loop. So I had to do a bunch of tricks. I had to make sure that the blinking lights on the buildings as well as the generation of the particles were all running on the same period, so that I believe after 10 seconds or so I could repeat the footage identically. Now I'm not gonna go through all this in here. We're just gonna create the infinite stream of raindrops and see how that works. So again, as a producer or as an emitter, I want to run with a box, but this time I wanted to produce the particles that are going downwards. And instead of using the velocity, I'll use wind for that purpose. Or actually, you know what, I can use a combination of two, and that's going to be even cooler. So first thing we need to do is to make sure the particles are traveling in the right direction. So let's see, right now they're going outwards. In the uniform fashion, we want to switch them to directional. And where are they heading? The spread is way too big to understand it. Let's increase the velocity and remove the randomness from it, and the distribution and motion. Whoa, 0. And look again. And they are going pretty much every which way. This is no good. Okay, direction spread was still at 20. So it looks to me like they're traveling away from camera. We want them to travel down, so let's figure out which rotation does it. And I never seem to manage to do it at the first try. So this is an undo. There we go. So X rotation at minus 90 degrees is going to make the particles travel down. Now this is more of a water hose rather than rain, so we definitely will want to lower the velocity to something like maybe 50, maybe 100. The velocity will be affected by the wind anyway, so it doesn't matter so much, and add the randomness of, let's say, 60 to it. This is looking fine so far. Let's adjust the size of our box emitter, so it should be really wide. We want it to be wider than our composition. And typically I write a very simple expression in here, but I'm just gonna adjust it manually. But if you want to do it automatically, and make sure that it fits in anything, what you can do is just write this comp with plus, let's say 100. You know what? Instead of talking about it, I can just do it. This comp with plus 100. And what this will do is it will calculate how wide the composition is and add 100 pixels for a good measure, so that it extends by 50 here and 50 here, making sure that you know, all the particles are going all the way to the edge. Emitter size in X and Y, we can lower it to, let's say, 10 and 10. And now we have to take care of the generation itself. So we don't want, you know, too many of those particles coming down at the same time. We want much fewer of them. But at the same time, I want to make sure that, let me just extend it a bit and give them longer life. Particle, where's life? Particle life. What, 12 again. If you look right now, you can see that the particles are kind of generated at almost equal time intervals. So, you know, we have one particle at 1 second, another at 2 seconds, another at 3 seconds, and it's kind of predictable and not very realistic. So we can either extend the height of our particle generator, but then some of them will have to travel really long distance, or play a little bit with some expressions, and that's what I kind of like to do. So it could be a logical step right now to use the randomized expression to generate those particles, but I'm gonna stick with wiggle. It's I don't know, I just feel it better and got used to using it for many occasions. So I'm gonna add another controller in here. So expression controls slider controller, drop it on top and call it randomizer. And I've done some tests before, and I hope this will work well. I'm gonna apply an expression in here, which will be wiggle 15 170. Okay, so 15 times a second, which is half of our frame rate, wiggle will generate a random number between -170 and 170. So if I just turn on the graph editor, we can see this is what it looks like. Right now, this is a complete chaos, but what I would like to do right now is to make sure that whenever our value crosses 100, whenever it's above 100 in here, it will generate a new drop. So how I can do it is basically by going to our particular right now, and I have to turn off the graph for a moment. Going to the particular emitter, particles per second, and actually I lied a bit, or I bent the truth. It will increase the chance of generating particle whenever it crosses the 100 threshold. So I'm gonna go to particles per second, alt click on this one and type the following: x equals, and let's link to our slider. So we assign the value of x into that random wiggle expression, and then we're gonna go into x equals math dot floor x divided by 100. So we first divide that number by 100 and then bring it down to the closest full number. So some of them would be negative, but particles per second does not accept negative values. So if we just look right now at the graph of this expression, let's turn off that one, we can see that we have few chances to generate a particle. And when we play it back, this looks like a pretty good combination. Not too many, not too few. As I said, this is the math that I did previously for the example I shown you, and it felt like it works fine. You know what, maybe we can increase the chance just a tiny bit more, just so the video is a bit more interesting. Let's go back in here and simply increase the number of wiggles, and if we do that, we should be having few more particles. But you know what? I'm not super happy with their distribution anymore, so that kind of sucked. All right, let's go back to 30 maybe. Okay, now I'm messing it up because I went away from the established formula. This is cool. Okay, so 10, 170. This is generating them in a better way. Cool. So this is our randomizer, and we have the emission of the particles. Next thing I want to do is generate the proper look for those particles. So let's play with that a little bit. So we can actually already push it back in here to make sure that we pre-roll the footage and we start with already something happening. So our first particle somewhere here, we can pre-roll it even further. Cool. So even in the beginning we have something going on. And let's grab our emitter also and pull it out of the frame. So right now the particles are getting born at exactly the midpoint. We want it way above, so I'm just gonna pull it back until, let's say, how tall is our emitter? It's 10 pixels, so minus 20 is, whoa, sorry, minus 20 is absolutely safe. So this way none of the particles will ever pop on the screen. And it seems I somehow managed to rotate this layer, probably by typing random numbers very quickly. All right. So the best way to create streaking on those would be to use the aux system, where each particle generates its own particles in its wake. So let's start with that. First, we're gonna make our particles disappear. So I'm gonna just get our particle size and bring it down to 0. They're still there, we just can't see them. Then we're gonna go to aux system and switch the emit property to continuously. And this will make sure that the particles are always emitted each frame. We need to keep the emit probability at 100%. So again, they're emitted continuously, but we'll end up increasing the amount of particles per second to make sure that the lines are smooth. So let's see, probably something like 30, which is 1 particle per frame, would do. We can increase the life of the particles to make the streaks a bit longer. And let's try maybe 2 seconds, maybe even a bit more. Let's try 3 seconds. This looks about fine. I'm gonna go with 3.5. We don't want any velocity. Velocity would just make them spread around. And the size would be probably, this is way too small. Let's go with 10. This is looking fine. Now we definitely don't want them to be all colorful. So color over life, we just switch it to white, or we can just pull color from main. This is much simpler. And now we can either play with opacity over life or size over life. And I like to do opacity because when we do size, we'll end up with those drops with very, very sharp tails. Instead, we can do opacity and make it kind of fade over time, creating a nice soft fade away. So this is looking good. Let's just quickly preview it to see the speed at which they are moving. Feels fine to me. Now, of course, unless we're in some really freakish alternative version of the universe, the particles or the raindrops wouldn't be moving at such straight line. And I'm also seeing that we could push it even further back to have few more of them on the screen. This is just there is no perfect solution for this. We just need to find something that works. Okay, this looks pretty good. Now we have overlapping ones. This is better. We'll see if this will work or if we'll need to tweak it. And actually I can just play with random seed. This looks like a fairly good distribution, except for this part. Yeah, this is not easy, finding a perfect random seed for the particles. I'm trying to find something that doesn't overlap too many of them and at the same time creates a interesting flow. Okay, this looks cool. I may not be super happy with the amount of empty space we have on the left, but I can solve it easily by just moving the emitter a bit to the left. Cool. So I said we're going to be using wind to modify their flow. This will come in just a moment. I want to start with turbulence instead. So I'm going to go to the air and start playing with the turbulence field. So let's in the beginning just leave all the settings as they are and increase the effect position value to, let's say, 100. And you can already see that something interesting is starting to happen, but unfortunately some of the particles seem to be backing up on themselves, so they're not exactly traveling all the way down. So we need to keep playing with the settings. Let's see if lowering the complexity to 2 or maybe to 1 could help that. It is slightly better, but it's still a bit soft. Alright, let's see what else we can change. We don't want to have any evolution going on, so I'm gonna zero that out and just play with the multiplier and scale. What would happen if I increase the scale? Probably it will freak out completely. Yeah, so that's not the way to go. I think I need to lower the scale instead. Yeah, so this is starting to get it. So 3 is probably not the right number. 6 looks a bit more. We don't want any fade in curve, so let's lower this to 0 and see what happens right now. This is starting to look more like what we were expecting to see. It's still not perfect, but we're still few ways away from the final look. So let's mess it up a bit with some wind. So still in the air settings, we're gonna go into wind Y, which modifies the speed at which the particles are moving, and we're gonna put another wiggle expression on it. So again, I'm trying to figure out the right values. Let's try wiggle, let's say twice a second, 120 pixels. Okay, this is pretty cool. We're getting some tearing, and the particles themselves are not moving at the same speed, but kind of slow down and speed up. Probably I could increase the frequency to 3. Could be too much, or no, this is actually pretty good. Now, instead of moving them left and right, I'm going to also add a Z direction wiggle. So another alt click, and let's wiggle it at 2, and let's say probably 40 would be the maximum we want to go. And this will just create a kind of look as if they have to hop over obstacles as they go. And I'm looking at it right now, and I have a feeling that I want to change one thing. Now, a moment ago I was saying how fading away the opacity is better than the scale. I think I'm gonna go with scale instead. I'm kind of not very happy with the dirt that is being produced in here on the way, as when the particles slow down they start overlapping more. So let's go back to our aux system and switch few settings around. So let's go to opacity, bump it to 100, opacity over life, keep it static, and then go to size over life and give it a bit of a ramp. And this is starting to look better. Let's see if I could draw a better one. This is always tough. I can't wait until Trapcode or Red Giant decides to update the interface of Particular and give us a proper ramp editor. This is a bit ridiculous. You know, this is not bad. I'll just smooth it out a few times. So smooth, 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 smooth. And I can see a bit of tearing happening here, so I have to increase the frequency at which the particles are produced. I'm just gonna go up to 50, and this should solve it. So Now that I'm looking at it, I mean, it's definitely starting to look more organic, more realistic. A few things I could still do is, one, I think I'm gonna bump the size to, let's say, 14 to make them a bit stronger, and now they became too strong, so I need to redraw this curve. Here, this is not bad. Smooth, 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 smooth. This should be a curve editor. So this is fine. And what else? I can go back to my physics, and in here where I have the turbulence field, I can make it move with wind, which it already does, and that's great. Okay, so the wind is right now affecting the field. If I zero it, we get a bit more boring result, but if I push it up to 80, it looks a bit better. Okay, so at this point we have our static drops, we have our dynamic drops, and it's time to combine them. So I'm going to need 2 copies of my raindrops. One will be raindrops on transparency, and I'm gonna use that for masking. And then another copy will be raindrops on a 50% gray, which I'm going to use for distortions. So I can simply go to my raindrop style. You know what? Let me create a new composition. This is raindrops matte, and I'm just gonna drop both the dynamic and static in here and switch them to screen mode. So this is already looking like, you know what, probably my background raindrops are too few or too small, and my foreground ones are way too big. So let's go to dynamic, back up that size a bit. Where was it? Aux system. I just bumped it up to 14. Let's bring it back to 12. This is looking fine. And then maybe go to my static raindrops and see how we can affect it. So particular, we're generating how many in the beginning? 5,000. Let's bump it up to 7,500. Offset it back and maybe play with the size a bit more. So let's bump the size to 12. And you know what? This may be it. All right, so now in the raindrops matte, you can see if we zoom in that our static ones are very soft and blurry, while the dynamic ones are very sharp. So we need to blur them out a little bit. And I'm wondering if this will give us any problems, this kind of streaking in here. I'm trying to keep the sizes and the generation manageable. I don't want to have it render forever, but I may just need to increase the amount of particles a tiny bit again. So let's go to aux system. Hello, there we go. Particles per second, 50. Let's go to 60. That should soften it up. Yeah, that helped. And now in here, on top of the whole thing, I'm just gonna add fast blur and blur it by the factor of, let's say, 2 pixels, just to give it a bit more softness. And that should be our primary matte. It's looking fairly good. I'm seeing that my producer, I think, is still a bit too low, because I can see a particle beginning here, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. The only thing I want to do is add a bit of vignette around it, and the reason for it is, as I think I said before, we're going to be using this as a matte for a distortion, and if we have perfectly white pixels next to the edge, the distortion is going to pull the pixels from outside of the screen and kind of mess up our look, creating some weird transparency effect. So what I can do is simply add a black solid on top, double click the rectangular mask, change the mask into subtract, and then play with the settings. I'm just gonna lower the expansion to, let's say, maybe -15, and increase the feather to 30 by 30. Yes, and this helps me soften up all those pixels on the side. You know what, maybe the feather could be even lower, 25 is just fine. All right. On top of this, we need our distortion mat. So that's going to be very simple. We're gonna create yet another. Oh, this looks so beautiful. Actually, this looks wrong. Why do we have a frame in which we see only one type? Because we have dynamic ones here. No matter, my bad. We're just gonna take the Raindrops mat, drop it into a new composition, rename this composition into Raindrops distortion map. And in here, we need to tweak it a tiny bit. So I'm going to add a new solid with a 50% gray color. So brightness at 50. Put it underneath the Raindrops mat. And to get rid of that black rectangle, I'm just going to change the mode into screen, or maybe lighten. Let's do lighten. Okay. And I believe this concludes the second chapter of this tutorial. So right now we have our background plate, we have our raindrops, and I'm just gonna organize it a tiny bit. You know what? Screw organization. Everything is named properly. We know where things are. Let's move on to chapter 3.